Hello again, I'm Steve McAllister, and this is the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. The dust is just starting to settle on an extremely busy SBC Summit Canada, which, not surprisingly, placed a lot of focus on what's happened in Ontario over the past 4+ years and what's happening in Alberta in the lead up to July 13th. Dave Briggs and yours truly covered the proceedings from the conference in last week's newsletter, but we wanted to get the insights of the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Gaming Association, Paul Burns. We're catching up with Paul at the end of a week in Las Vegas, where he was among the speakers at the International Conference on Gambling and Risk-Taking. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, before we get into what happened in Toronto at the SBC Summit, maybe just fill our listeners and viewers in a little bit about your week in Las Vegas, and not surprisingly, we're catching you at a destination once again that's not in Canada.
Yes, it's the UNLV's International Gaming Institute does every 3 years a conference on gambling and risk-taking. It was originally founded by Bede Gaming, who founded the institute at the University of Nevada, Reno, many years ago. This is probably the 4th or 5th time I've been at their conference, and it's wonderful as it brings a wide variety of industry, academic, and also some from outside, because it is also, they talk about risk-taking, and so bring some other features from other sectors and learnings to the conference. And so it's a very full and rich program. At any given session, there's 4 or 5 breakout rooms, and there's usually 3 papers being presented in each room in that period. So there's a lot of information. This year they had an excellent stream on AI, which built upon, they did a piece of research, did a global study on the use of AI in the gaming industry that they released, some of which was released through at RGC, and just at the Discovery Conference, Kaz, who led the study, made a presentation there. But there was a whole stream of that work with the work that they've done on this, and it's something they're going to continue to do. But the use of AI was a popular stream, but also looking at from treatment and impact on youth to research around from public policy. There was the Nevada chair of the Nevada and Louisiana gaming regulatory agencies were here, and so it was very good, an excellent week. Lots to soak in.
Hey, Paul, you did a chat yourself with Dr. Mary Donohue. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's Dr. Mary Donohue has done. It's the founder of the Digital Wellness Center, and has done a lot of work on the issue of around micro breaks and the impact they have on changing people's play patterns and moods. And it's amazing. She's done with a collection of land-based casinos online and through the affiliate world, is being able to through doodles and other games and things like that to get people to take a break. And so she presented some of her findings on mood changes. And I've had the opportunity to work with Mary on her project on this for a few years now, and because she started in a different place. She actually started in oncology waiting rooms around taking stressful, is the issue of those situations where people under high stress or focus, maybe not focused on listening to a doctor, but so using the use of doodles and games and other things to change their mood and provide a more level emotional state. So I introduced her to this gaming industry is something where this could be very useful, and so she's done a project and a great one with TikTok, as well as creating a program. And so some of this early days in the research, but she's beginning of a paper to show some of the early results. And so it's there was lots of these kinds of that's what this conference was for, is to be able to bring new ideas and show the and beginning to people to present their research and have discussions about it. So it's been great.
It ties in a little bit to the conversations we've had before, Paul, where you've spoken about social media and youth and again, there's so much out there right now. Studies around problem gambling rates among youth and the effect of advertising on youth, and a message that you've been very consistent with for quite a while now. That this is part of a bigger picture. And when you talk about taking breaks, it's like something as simple as my wife and I in the evenings trying to make a point of putting our phones away from at 9 o'clock at night and no longer looking at Instagram videos and Facebook and for me in my job scrolling through Twitter. And it's not just gambling that's an issue. It's just and as you've talked about very passionately, this is something that really affects youth as well. Is there the time they spend on social media platforms?
No, it's very true, and that's understanding our place in the larger digital world. And when we talk, and one of the things I talked about in our presentation was why this is important to industry and why industry should pay attention to these things. Because the reality is, it's everybody wants the same thing, and we want a healthy relationship with players, so they're using this for within their budgets and for entertainment, and everybody is in that positive outcome and be able to minimize any harm that people may experience. And I think we all want the same outcomes. And the idea is, and I use it and Mary's working and we're developing the concepts around there's good ROI for the gaming industry to embrace these kind of tools and measures, because customer acquisition is expensive. And retaining a healthy relationship with a customer in the long term is the best thing for everybody. And that's what everybody, I think, every company I talk to, and that's where, as an industry, we need to lean in and make sure that we're doing this. And everybody, as I said last week at the summit, when we talk about, we've introduced our code for responsible gaming advertising as a way to better explain regulations to the public and understand what things actually mean. But the other side of it is, as I said, the industry, that the regulation policies and all these things, it's the floor, it's the floor. It's not the ceiling. We got to aim higher, and we got to do better. And that's all of this is part of that conversation.
That's a great segue, Paul. I wanted to cover this topic at some point, but let's do it right now. I sat in on a safer gaming panel on the Thursday afternoon of the Canadian Summit, and Amanda Brewer from the CGA was part of that panel. And I had a quote in last week's newsletter from Jay Wellborn of the AGCO, and I think it really mirrors what you just said. And the quote from Jay is, there are signals to us as an industry that more is needed. It's not window dressing, it's serious stuff. If we don't step up, others will step in. And I'll just say, Tom, or Paul, that was conversations I had on the floor at the Metro Toronto Convention Center, conversations I had with industry leaders in the hotel hallways and at reception. That there was kind of a common theme that, for lack of a better term, was kind of a come to Jesus moment for the industry, that they realized that they can't, they're obviously, you can take us. There's a messaging around advertising, and you and I have talked about this at length. But there is a point where perspective does kind of cross over into reality, and there do have to be steps taken in terms of communication and putting programs into place.
There is, and I think as you saw through a lot of the summit sessions last week, there was a theme through a lot of this, and there was very similar conversations happening in many sessions. And the question is that we all have to understand is that we're not just doing this because we're all together in a room for 3 days, and the fact that that's part of this conversation has to continue into action, and this is where I've kind of to say that we're all government, industry, regulators, as the government as policymakers and operators, all need to sit at the table together, because we all have a responsibility. And I put our other stakeholders, such as professional sports leagues and broadcasters, in the same thing. And I've had conversations with them all about all of these things over the last months, and where we need to go is we're looking to make sure that our members in the industry aims to be better and lean in a little harder on what we're doing. Because I'll say this, that Canada has some of the best responsible gaming measures, regulatory measures in the world. We do excellent work. Oftentimes we don't talk about it enough. And we don't talk about the fact that what the efficacy is of some of the regulatory measures and other policies that are put in place. Ontario operators and soon Alberta operators are required to, continue to monitor player for risk in real time. So what have those interventions been? What has that meant? We've had an emphasis in Ontario on advertisers taking a percentage of their gross gaming revenue for responsible gaming advertising. And we've had an outsized promotion of player tools. I've heard anecdotally from operators they've had a higher uptick in Ontario in the use of tools than any other of their jurisdictions. Well, let's quantify some of these things. Let's talk about the efficacy of our regulatory and our policy framework that we've built, because we've done excellent work. The conversations in Canada when it comes to responsible gaming started in the 90s. It didn't start a decade ago. It didn't start 5 years ago, as many of the countries that we're being compared to now did. And that's where I take exception, because, you can, having come from a political background, sometimes, good politics doesn't always make good public policy. And so when you try and make an issue go and you create a policy, like Italy, I read a paper not too long ago, banned advertising in 2018. Is gambling awareness is the same or higher as it's ever been? Why? Because they just found different channels. And people find out, and what it does do is that you want to make sure that you're creating a framework of consumer protection with your regulatory framework. And so you want to make sure as many people are in that framework. And we've seen, the channelization study that was referenced last week that AGCO did again, and then are now into the 90s in Ontario. Well, that's excellent. That's another note that more people are playing in environments where they can be protected. But that still doesn't take away the conversation of need to protect youth, and understanding that some of those gambling habits are starting long before they even find gambling products, in the sense of traditional regulated products, but in video games and other places in the internet that aren't regulated and they have free access to. And so, and these are the conversations I think we need to have more of, about not how do you rein in a regulated gaming industry, but we ignore all the other stuff that's going on. I think it's a collective effort and a collective conversation about all of this. And if there is better laws, that will be part of it. But if there's also better education and more conversations, then that's going to have to be really important about how we educate youth and what the conversations are we have.
Yeah, and I also, Paul, really think it's incumbent on our elected officials to educate themselves on the gaming industry too, regulated versus unregulated. And again, we've seen it in some of the legislation. I mean, there's legislation in Ottawa right now, Bill S211, which looks like it's going to be passed, and it just focuses on sports betting advertising. When again, I'm hitting you over the head with this once again, but we know that in Ontario, overwhelming activity on regulated game sites is on online gaming, and it's been pretty well documented. And I referenced this in the newsletter this week that there has been a decline of advertising. So when you read a headline about explosion in betting advertising, that's old news. But I do, one thing about the summit last week, I thought it's probably the best conference I've been to in Toronto. I think this is 4 years for me now, and in terms of the subject matter and the access to the panels and hearing from smart people. And you do, as someone covering the industry, you do wish that people on the outside took the time to spend a day at the conference and listen to some of these panels and have a chance to speak with people like yourself and others, because I think it'd be great education on just informing them more about this industry.
It is there is a gap in knowledge. Let's be clear. It was clear from the first conversations and debate you saw in the Senate on S211. of understanding what has gone on. The reality is Canadians have had access to, offshore online gaming for 25 years. It didn't get invented in 2021 with the passage of C218 or the Ontario creating the regulated market in 2022. And so when you, and a lot of, we've spent a lot of time talking to members of parliament and senators, and when you educate them on what the regulatory regime includes and how it talks and the interest, there's general, I didn't know that was often the phrase that comes back. And the understanding of what we've done in this country when it comes to responsible gaming programming and education and the investments, and the fact that we export a lot of the work we've done in this country to around the world, and that we are sought after as a model to emulate in many ways. So I think it's important that people understand the long-term investment and the dedication and commitment that's come from gambling's earliest days in this country to its continued, as a leader in player education, player protection measures, and so we've got, I think a lot of work to do in terms of that education. We're continuing to do it with members, but also it's the agencies and governments that have their own regulatory frameworks need to actually talk about it more too, because we know that there is good acceptance of gaming as a product amongst Canadians, and we know that the high acceptance improves if they understand that people are being protected and they know where the money's going and all of those measures, and that so that more knowledge equals more acceptance. And I think we have to work from that principle to talk about what we do.
Is your iGaming platform ready for market expansion? Bede Gaming is ready to support your needs across jurisdictions with the SOC 2 compliant platform, scalable multi-tenant infrastructure, and unlimited configurability. Book a meeting with Bede's team and future-proof your growth plan. I did find it a bit odd that there wasn't more representation from the provincial lottery and gaming corporations at the conference, and obviously OLG had a big presence. I actually spoke to one person from another provincial lottery gaming corporation who told me that they had to fight really hard to receive permission to attend the conference, and it feels like a missed opportunity for everybody involved. I mean, this is supposed to be a gathering of the Canadian gaming industry, and it just doesn't. It's hard for me to understand why you wouldn't have everybody at the table to have conversations, and even if you're on opposite sides of the debate, sometimes that it should be an opportunity for everybody to get together and have those conversations.
Well, and that's what it's designed for. And these are the forums in which people share their opinions and ideas and thoughts, and that's why the panels are built with a diverse representation of opinions and people from different backgrounds and different parts of the world. And I think that's the benefit of having these gatherings, is the fact that you can learn and walk away with a few new nuggets of information or knowledge or an understanding of a different opinion. And that's what that's why SBC's done an amazing job at building and growing the summit content, and it attracts people from across the world as well. Which is always good to hear those other opinions and other thoughts. And so I think it's why organizations choose and don't choose to attend. I can't pretend to know what the decision making is in many organizations, but we know that there were representation from many of the provincial agencies and grounds were in Toronto for it. So it's what we. But we'll continue to create the forums, because I think the dialogue is only going to make us better.
Hey, Paul, there was, the other thing I got from kind of having those behind the scenes conversations around messaging is I think that there was an understanding and a realization that the industry does need to have other voices out there. And I spoke to one person who I have a ton of respect for, who's been involved in the industry, who basically said, I'll put it in a more polite term, but that you're the guy that gets thrown to the wolves all the time, and that it is time for others to step up. And so again, and it's great to have people say that, but is that something are those conversations happening within the Canadian Gaming Association, and are you getting that kind of feedback as well?
Yes, no, that we are having those conversations too. I mean, we have the CGA started about a year ago with a little more than a year ago with a responsible gaming working group, as we called it for now. It's been a great group of a wide array of people from different parts of the sectors of the Canadian industry. And it's really been about trying to get that communication going in terms of talking about what we do, but also then being able to focus. When we set out, we set out a set of guiding principles, which we built with industry input for the industry and the association, our members to go, to follow when it came to responsible gaming. We followed that up with the code for responsible gaming advertising as a way to more, I guess, make it in layman's term of what regulation means, and with examples and a little more plain language, and some things that we asked the industry to raise the bar a little bit, and so we have to continue to do more, and that's part of what we've, in terms of some industry participants and companies do amazing work. And have a strong commitment, and others are still finding their way, and that's where we come in and try and focus the efforts, because I think that it's about it's a mindset that people talk about all of this is making gambling normalized behavior. Yeah, it is. It's been around for 50 years in a widespread regulated format in Canada. Starting with the lotteries in the late 70s, 80s, and even before that, 70s. So it is. And we think that now in this world, the digital world, that when I talk about education programs, especially when you talk to youth, it's things like digital literacy, financial literacy, understanding risk. It's not simply gambling issues. Some of these are life skills, but the issue is how you interact with our product. And not being afraid to have the conversations. And this is the part that sometimes, and particularly sometimes with government. I worked in government for many years in politics, and I know it's not always want to have the conversation to talk about gambling. And you need to. And that's what we're trying to, in terms of bring everybody out and say, we need to put ourselves in the center of this conversation, because they're the ones that are doing it, responsible, regulating it, overseeing it, and benefiting from it. And we have that responsibility. And so it's not just to say, we'll leave it to somebody else. That's not going to work. And that's what we're trying to change that. And that's part of what I think everybody has a shared responsibility. And I said, we brought new stakeholders into this industry because of sports betting and things like that. So they got to come to the table too.
It's interesting. I recorded a podcast last week with Tom Waterhouse, the Australian businessman who is the chief investments officer for Waterhouse VC, and Tom was telling me the story that gambling's been part of his family for over 100 years, and he talks about his first when online gaming came into play. I think around 2000 or 2003, and getting involved in that and creating his own company in that. So to your point, again, it's not like all of a sudden in April 2022, all of a sudden that online gaming was here and this was a new phenomenon.
No, that's exactly, it's been 25 plus 26 years of availability of the product. It's only continued to grow as a product, and this, in terms of spend and in the space, whether that's within a regulated market or outside of it, it continues to grow. So you can't sit and do nothing. Enhanced regulation and policies and this is what's coming, because, we're seeing, there was surprisingly not a lot of discussion this week at this conference about prediction markets. Like, it's been a dominant topic in the United States. But the point is, it's the demonstration that there are always going to be new products in new ways. And that's the part of why we have to be, this is an evolution. This is a conversation that is ongoing. and will continue to evolve. And that's where it's understanding that's the environment in which we now live. And for regulators, you can't set a set of regulations and hope they'll last for 15 or 20 years without touching them. That was a long time ago when that happened, and now you got to be more nimble and more effective in understanding new technology and adapting to that. And that's everybody. The industry does it, regulators, government, and understanding the impact of that. And so I think there's, as I said from the beginning, we all want the same outcomes. So let's just talk about then, the things that we do to get there.
Dale Nally spoke at the Canadian Summit, and Dave Briggs covered Dale's remarks quite extensively in last week's newsletter. I did chuckle a little bit when the Service Alberta minister mentioned that he would like the market open in May. I'm thinking there are probably suppliers and operators out there who might have clutched at their heart for a second when he made that comment. On the other hand, though, it does feel, talking to people, and I ran into Dan Keene at one of the receptions, that there's a lot of excitement around Alberta, and that both the provincial government and Alberta iGaming Corporation that they've done a pretty good job in putting the pieces together for this market to launch in the middle of July.
They've done a great job. I mean, listen, just what I said to people last week. So, today would have been the market opening day, and everybody kind of was like, "Oh, we're not even close." And I know, and I was like, "Yeah, that was an interesting discussion a few months ago when that was going on." What we're seeing though is, the one thing I think that there was universal agreement on is that Dan Keene, the AGIC team, and Dave Berry and the AGLC team have done amazing work in the last number of months to begin to operationalize this. And I think that was clear. And in the fine, I think something Canadian tradition, because we saw the same from Ontario, is the level of dialogue, cooperation, and openness to discuss issues and work through and understand, because they're also learning this industry in real time as those agencies work, and that the industry is happy to lean in and help. But it's also the same that there's dialogue and understanding, and that's making this work a whole lot better. And that does not happen in a lot of places in the world, as I hear often. And so that is the part that I think that will make sure that everything is launched successfully in July, and to be continued as tweaks and measures need to happen over time, as we've seen in Ontario and other. It will happen, and that's great. But the dialogue has been a great way to start this relationship. And they've done, and their group, both those agencies have done tremendous work to operationalize this in a very short period of time.
How important, Paul, is it that this market will launch with a centralized self-exclusion program in place? And again, we did reach out to IGO last week about the response to the launch of their BetGuard product. We confirmed from other sources that the first week they had about 500 people sign up, which again seems to be a decent number, given that there's been no promotional campaign yet to promote that BetGuard is available, and that the operators now are just featuring BetGuard on their apps and websites. But it just feels like, given some of the frustration around not having BetGuard in place for so long, that's definitely good. That's going to be an asset for Alberta when it launches.
It will be. I mean, Minister Nally and the government has been very clear from the beginning, and their commitment to consumer protection, and that's really what in embracing that. And he said early on that the market will not open without it, and so to the credit of AGLC, and they've delivered, and the fact that there's a system there that's operators are now starting to test, and I think that's great, because it's important part of understanding and that what the government's had clear objectives, and Ontario did the same. And I think that getting to BetGuard it was a great moment, and it's needed, and the operators. I was often asked, well, do the operators support this? And it's like, yes, we do. We actually have been wanting it for a long time, because it is a great tool. And it does provide that level, because no operator wants someone that's been self-excluded on someone else's platform. They've done that somewhere else to continue to play on their own. And so that's, this is a way that we can begin to create a greater level of protection. And I think, that Alberta's commitment from the opening is terrific. And I think that will be an asset in that market. And the fact that they've already had, something of a universal list through their own casinos and Play Alberta. And this is just one more they've taken to enhance the technology behind that to make it more robust and in a broader multi-operator environment. So I think that's great, and we will have that tool as one of the many tools around consumer protection that are in the Alberta regulations.
It's a much different environment for this launch than Ontario was back in 2022 when it comes to the advertising issue. And my feeling is that we won't see that tidal wave that we did back in 2022. And again, there are many reasons for that. Again, have you been privy? Like, is that something that you've talked about with your members, or that's something that there have been conversations between you or operators and Minister Nally's office and AIGC?
No, we've understood that there's, part of one of the unique parts that Alberta did was they allowed for pre-market sign up and advertising, which was not part of the Ontario market. It was the day one thing in the way you go, and coming soon was kind of, I think, the best you could say. And so I think what we've seen in the Alberta market is that there's a lot of local advertising, whether it's out of home, in communities and the local television and other places, but there is it's a lot very localized, and operators are, there will be will there be more advertising in the Alberta market? Yes, there will, as companies are deciding if if they're entering, two, when, because I think some obviously will be there for the first day on July 13th, but I think others over the coming weeks and months will continue to enter the market after that. And so we'll see what but there is, when you're creating, one of the things I will commend AGIC for is that they've launched a public education campaign, and they're in the market advertising right now, and they have a campaign to promote their market and what their agency is and what it's doing, and the AIGCL that you see play on sites that only have this moniker, and the fact that will continue into the March post-open of the market, into talking about the level of and measures of protection they've built into the regulatory regime. So they've got a campaign that's going to roll right through into the fall and beyond, as part of that education of the marketplace, and that's something we didn't see in Ontario.
I wanted finish up by talking a bit about Stan Cho's remarks. The Minister of Tourism, Culture and Gaming for Ontario spoke on the Thursday morning, and when Stan appeared a year before, he said that his office would be undertaking review. I think the main message from his speech this year was that review has identified 6 areas of studies for reducing red tape, anti-money laundering, responsible gambling, financial oversight, data management, audits, and glad to hear this, communications. Anything else? And again, both Jeff Zakote and I had a few minutes with the minister afterwards, and again, he talked about he's hearing from his fellow members of Queen's Park about concerns around problem gambling and also advertising, and he suggested, and both Jeff covered this and we covered the news last week, that there may be some further actions taken on the advertising piece. But was there anything that stood out in particular from Stan's remarks?
No, we appreciate the recognition on the duplication overlap and the punishing red tape, I'll be blunt, that comes with multi-agency overlap, and the fact that and some is just because of the existing relationship with the way contracts are structured and other things like that. I think that that's because in a very competitive gaming market, when you see compliance costs rising and you know almost in some cases faster than the market's growing, you got a problem. And particularly in the land-based sector in Ontario, the red tape reporting is getting to be punishing, to be blunt, and it needs to be looked at because I think there is, and this is where even one of the benefits and looking at between Alberta and Ontario and the agencies will have a greater level of cooperation as they have similar standards and being able to work together to achieve, and do their compliance work. We need to make sure that's part of that cost and burden of compliance. It doesn't start to drive people out of markets. And that's not to say you have to lower your standards. You just have to be efficient in what you're looking for. That if you're asking for the conductor manager wants an audit and the regulator wants an audit, can we have the same one instead of two? There's a good start. If you're going to do things, do you ask for information? You may both to the conductor manager and then the regulator ask for information. But they may ask for it at different times in different formats. And it's like, well, if you can get together and ask for it once, or there are ways that you can retrieve it, or requesting operators to manipulate their data to give them reports versus just you can have the data and you can do with it what you like. So we're not having the burden of cost and time and staff to write reports for you. And, one side would like it this way and another side would like it that way. That's what's going on. And that's when they've recognized that. And I think that came through in that review very loud and clear. There are better ways to do things to achieve the same or better outcomes, and honestly, in my opinion. And I think that's something we're waiting to see. I mean, a concern over advertising, again, it goes back to Ontario has some of the best programs in the world. And the investments have been long and real. Is there things we can improve upon? Sure there are. Are the things, but the fact is we need them to talk about it. We need to talk about the efficacy of the regulatory regime and what it's done to protect people. But at the same time, it's always been the dialogue about what do we need? Do we need to change something? How do we need to do? The AGCO did a very good review on guidance when it came to monitoring player for risk, as operators had many questions about certain ways that should be done. And so they actually created a dialogue where we could actually, operators could share best practices, guidance, have discussions, and out came a guidance document. That's good work. Those are the kinds of things that help improve the regulatory regime. So there's ways to do this, and not just let's just change if we go in and change a law or change a regulation or do something else and we'll walk away. No, it's not that easy, to be honest, and it needs dialogue and conversation. And that's what that's what we want to achieve. That's what the industry wants, is the fact that we all can work and be better. We can all work. If we work together, cooperatively, again, we all want the same outcomes. So let's try and work together.
Just quickly, is it possible for IGO and AIGC to collaborate on that red tape reduction matter, and as an opportunity for those sides to work together?
Well, I think there is, and I think this is something that as the CGA, and we look at Canada as a whole, when it comes to, we're not a very big country. The gaming industry, by and large, the products are much the same everywhere, same suppliers. But what you have is, you've got to test to this standard, and this province is standard, that province is standard, when they're 98% the same. But it costs us time and burden and other things to say, why don't we look at harmonizing some of these standards? Doesn't mean it's everywhere, but on certain things, whether it's technical standards for games and equipment, whether it's things like advertising policies or responsible gaming measures, and that we work for a more of a universal, so operators can, efficiencies and change. AML is one it's a high level of frustration, as you know, Steve, because we started with that Canada's AML regime and legislation took what is a national regulatory program and provincialized it by making the conductor managers the reporting entities. And so, companies that operate in multi-provinces have different AML regimes inside their own organizations, and has created a very heavy compliance burden, which seems actually produces better outcomes. at this point in time. And so there's a high level of frustration on these areas. And so, and this is just, it's more willing to dialogue, to commit to taking a look and doing things better, but it doesn't mean, it means we can actually maybe even create better standards in some cases if we actually work at this the right way. And that's something that I think everybody has to kind of step back and, whether it's taking a check on my institutional territory and turf and understanding it's about outcomes, people. That's what I keep saying. It's about what's the outcome, not about whether it's processed turf or other things. It's about outcome.
I know you have a plane to catch, so let's leave it there. That's Paul Burns, the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. Hey, Paul, thanks for doing this on yet another busy week. And
no problem.
Safe travels home, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Steve. Always a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. You can listen to this podcast on the various podcast apps. You can also watch my conversation with Paul on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Again, we really appreciate the listeners and viewers who support this podcast, and we will see everybody again very soon.